Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode and interview of the APWASI Wine Buzz. Today, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce to you not only a gentleman, but also a scholar and a good friend, and his name is Professor Keith Herndon. He is a man of distinction and a gentleman in every way. He's the professor of practice. He's the Morris Chair in News, Strategy and Management, and he's the Executive Director at the Cox Institute at the University of Georgia's College of Journalism and Mass Communication. Professor Herndon, pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you so much for having me, Clinton. It's been a great time with my studies at the APWASI, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Well, it's certainly our pleasure to have you, Keith. And I think I'm going to get straight into the questions that we have, and because there's so many interesting aspects of you that I know the listeners would love to know about you. And I think one of them is, what really sparked your interest in learning about wines?
Well, I think it had to do with this epiphany moment that I had many years ago. In the late 1980s, I was attending a conference in San Francisco and was invited as part of the activities to go to a wine luncheon that was held in Napa Valley at the Maryvale Winery. And the luncheon was in their barrel room. And it was quite an elaborate luncheon and just so well done. And being in that setting, and for the first time, really having someone teach me or walk us through this idea of pairing food and wine. I'm 28 years old. I don't really come from a wine background. And I have this moment where, wow, this is fascinating. This is something I want to know more about. And that moment launched a lifelong journey in trying to learn more about wine and how to appreciate it.
So what was the particular wine you had on that occasion, Keith?
Well, in those days, they had a label called Sunny St. Helena.
Sunny St. Helena.
Sunny St. Helena. And I remember the Sunny St. Helena Chardonnay was served at that luncheon. And it was an outstanding 1986 vintage Chardonnay. It stuck in my mind to the point where I have a rendering of the label of that bottle hanging in my kitchen wine cellar at my house. So,
right. I recall certain vintages too, and they always hold a special and memorable place in our hearts and memory. And for me, it's the travel that really ignites that fire and enthusiasm. So for you, Keith, why has it been so important for you to study the culture and history of wines?
Well, I grew up in a rural part of the Southeast, and obviously wine was not part of my upbringing in that regard. But I did grow up in my grandfather had a small farm, and my uncle, his brothers, my great uncles had small farms. And I think that when I had that epiphany moment, I started connecting this idea of wine to the agriculture. And then agriculture and the whole viticulture that goes along with that really is about a sense of place. And I didn't think that it was appropriate to study wine without studying the land and the people that are part of that background. And then when you start talking about the land and the people, then you're talking about culture and what drives them to create the products that they create. And then what's the history behind that? How did that varietal, how did that family, how did that farm, how did that vineyard get to where it is? And then all of that to me is just this, a process of understanding what the French call terroir. And how that all comes together. It's so vitally important. So I don't believe that you can really appreciate wine unless you appreciate the history of why it's made, the way it's made, and the culture of the people that are making it.
Absolutely. And certainly, I think for many of the listeners out there, if they think about Alsace Alsace is very unique, not only in its geographical location in the northeast of France, but because over the centuries, it has been at the crossroads of either the Germans or the French having influence over the area. And the individuals there, they speak both German and French perfectly well, and the cuisines are intermingled. Now, when we talk about what's happening to us in the world right now, we're driven with technology, we're driven with trends. We know that the new generation that is looking at the wines, what they are seeking in terms of defining their choice has differed. So what do you see as some of the technologies and media trends emerging for wine education, or for that matter, the wine industry, in your opinion, Keith?
Well, I think that it's so important these days for any type of an enterprise to have a social media presence and a social media strategy. And so I think that at first and foremost, the technology behind social media is going to be, driving marketing strategies. And I think that the idea of what does that mean, social media? Well, I mean, that could change over time. TikTok was not a thing just a few years ago, and now it's one of the larger platforms. So the idea of being able to understand how those things work. Now, personally, I don't have a TikTok account, but I can, I understand TikTok and I watch some of the videos. I mean, I have an account. I'm not doing the dance videos on there. Okay.
Of course, right.
But, but I understand it. And being a media professor, we have to understand now that social media and the media landscape are all intertwined. And I think that's really important. But there are also other ways that people are being able to go, directly to these experiences through social media, and also then being directed to things like podcasts, and having audio experiences through platforms like Clubhouse. These are things that I believe are driving, new interactions, and a younger audience will gravitate toward brands that understand how to make that authentic. Right.
So would, in your opinion, do you think it's fair to say that we are really at the precipice of change, but not only change, but a definitive seismic change in the perception of how wine, not only just wine, but the general sense of communication right now? And of course, wine is enveloped.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not something that's just happening now. I believe that the communication industry has been constantly evolving. And if you go back to as far back as 1980, in the early 80s, when we started really sensing this idea of the growth of a networked economy, and we had things in the 80s when cable television was just beginning to take off, and that represented a seismic shift in the way we thought of things. And in the early 90s, we had America Online and things like Prodigy and CompuServe. And that was the beginning of consumers being able to use computers to network and talk to people. And all those things were the precursors to, to media change. But, you can go back to the 1920s when radio was beginning, and then the 1950s when television was exploding. So there've always been these periods of significant media change. And so what I think we are now in is this era of what I call mobile social. And it's this combination of our mobile devices, our smartphones, and social media, giving us a platform to communicate 24/7, 365 days. It's never off. It's always there. And it's this, and I believe it's this this ubiquitousness of it that is this seismic shift that you're talking about.
So it's a sort of omnipresent communication saline drip that's coming into our veins and to our knowledge and to our sphere. And I'm totally in agreement with you. And because of that consistency and ubiquitous influence that it has, I think change is much more accelerated than it might be. Because I am finding through my experience that when one is wanting to learn more about wine, we are getting questions about what is the sustainability, what is the community, i.e. what is the winery doing, what is the methodology of the growing of their grapes? Is it more socially impactful? Is the carbon footprint reduced? So given those are all the sort of trigger points, how do you see the wine industry? How should they communicate this to their audiences in modern day media, Keith?
Right. Oh, I completely understand. I had a former student that was at in my house. We were having some wine and some sparkling wine, and we were celebrating one of my students who had recently graduated from law school, and we were having this wonderful conversation. But we had some sparkling wine, and the student just picked up the bottle, not realizing how heavy that glass was, and instantly the conversation turned to, well, is this a sustainable business model to be shipping a beverage around in such heavy glass, right? So there was this instant thought process that led to the weight of that bottle and the sustainability of that. And so I believe the wine industry has to explain why a sparkling wine bottle weighs so much, and how are they using other methods to be sustainable. I think where we're going to see some of that is this younger generation is much more willing to accept alternative packaging if they understand that it's going to be more environmentally friendly. So I think one of the things that wineries and winemakers will start embracing is all different types of packaging, and those of us who may be more traditionalists will just have to come along for the ride.
Yes, in fact, you're quite right. I mean, there's quite a number of champagne houses that are now using recycling material. Some are doing away with the more elegant type of packaging that they have. And, when we talk about coming back to culture, in your opinion, how important is the culture, approachability, and the history when it relates specifically to wine education? Because I know that you have a very broad, deep understanding of many different wine education styles.
Well,
I think in your personal experience.
Sure. I think that the idea of approachability and dealing with the history and understanding that much of our history in lots of different industries and lots of different cultures is not pretty. And we have to own up to our history, and we have to be able to put it in the right context. But I think if the culture of the wine industry going forward is going to appeal to today's modern consumer, then the wine industry has to continue to find ways to be inclusive and to find ways that's going to to appeal to that younger market they're not shy about their beliefs and what they want, and I believe that's an important voice that we're beginning to hear in our consumer markets across all kinds of consumer goods, and the wine industry being one that is steeped in long history and long tradition. They have to listen to what this younger market is saying, and they have to pay attention to that, and they have to say, how can we have more women at the table? How can we have more people of color at the table? How can we bring in these voices? How can we bring in this diversity and celebrate that diversity across our many, many products? And I think that for the industry to be sustainable long term, the younger consumer has to look at that industry and see one that is making progress on all those fronts.
I would agree with you there, Keith, because I feel we're really riding a huge wave, as it were, in surfing parlance, because we hear of the BIPOC, we hear of different type of wineries, we have different organizations specifically, could be related to women in wine or let's say Asian wine professionals, every possible representation has now started to open up, become more engaging. Now, here's my question. In your opinion, if we have so many different associations, the palate, the taste changes, whether you have a Western or an Eastern winemaker. When I talk someone from the Far East, I mean China, Japan, let's say the United States, Australia, it really depends on what they were brought up, what sort of palate feel they have. And yet now wines are being spread all over the world. And now with the new generation, don't you think that it's going to influence the style of wines?
I do. I think it will influence the style of wines, but I always think that wine and food and wine pairings have always been this potential to have this multicultural experience. And I use the example of what's better together than a German Riesling and some Thai curry.
Uh-huh.
Right? So, that's a multicultural experience. You're having a German Riesling, but you're eating Thai curry. So those things just go together. So if we just have an open mind and understand that wine and culture can blend, and it can blend across all kinds of cultures, and we can have these wonderful flavor profiles and these wonderful food and wine pairings at our table, and we can bring the people together and have the same kind of blending.
Well, it gives me great joy when I see you holding the sort of standard bearer and hoisting the flag for the culture and wine blending, which sort of leads.
I have to say, Clinton, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I'm steeped in the tradition of the training of the Asia Pacific Wine and Spirit Institute. That is your mission, and you've done it really well. And I have appreciated that approach in the studies that I've done with you and your organization.
Well, that is very, very kind and gracious of you, Keith, because a person of your stature and level of education, it means an enormous amount. So I thank you very much for that. And, because of that, in 2019, you received a Creative Teaching Award at the University of Georgia. And it was a wonderful accomplishment and an award well deserved. So what are some of the teaching philosophies that you hold when you are teaching the next generation?
Sure. Well, I think it's important for people listening to this interview to understand that I was not a professor my entire life. I spent a large chunk of my career in industry. I was a reporter and an editor at the Atlanta Journal and Constitution for 14 years. Then I moved into corporate, and I was in our internet operations, and I ran planning and product development and internet operations and things like that at a corporate level for 8 years. And then I left, and I had my own consulting company for about 10 years before I became a full-time professor. And I think it was important for me personally to bring all of that industry learning into the classroom and to try to be authentic to the students. This is who I am, and these are some of the experiences I had. But I was asked a few years ago to write down my teaching philosophy and to boil it down. And I came up with the acronym LEARN. Right. And if you can just, bear with me, I'll explain what that means here really quickly.
Please do.
The idea behind LEARN is, the first is leadership. If you're an instructor in a classroom, you have to assume the mantle of leadership. The people that are there want you to lead them. They want you to be responsible and in charge. So to be an effective teacher, I believe you have to be an effective leader, and you have to take on that mantle. Well, one of the things of being a leader is to set expectations, which is the E in LEARN. Your students can't succeed if they don't know what you want them to do. So you have to make sure that you tell them what the expectations are, right? So, and then the A in the acronym is accountability. So you're the leader, you've explained the expectations, then you have to be accountable to yourself to deliver the product, but you have to hold the students accountable to do the work. and
Very much so.
you can't let people slide, right? You can't treat some people differently than others. You can't have the teacher's pets, in the room. Those are the kind of things that just turn off the other students. So you have to hold everybody accountable and have standards that are applicable across the board. The R in this is respect. You must respect your students. If you do not respect the students, then you need to get out of the teaching business, right? I mean, it's like they are there to learn. And it's your responsibility as the teacher to teach them. And you can't teach people that you do not respect, right? So I've made it part of my shtick, if you will, to talk to 20-somethings and to understand what their generational pressures are, and to not be dismissive of their concerns. Because if you're dismissive of these concerns, then you're not really respecting their point of view. And I think respect is vitally important. And then the last part of this acronym is N for new. And so new means that you have to keep it fresh. The course material can get stale in the business that I teach in a lot, the media business. It changes so rapidly, as we were talking about earlier, that it's a constant challenge to be new and to be fresh. But that's my acronym. That's my teaching philosophy: leadership, set expectations, hold people accountable, respect them, and keep it fresh.
And I thank you for sharing that with us, Keith. And for the listeners of this program, I think you should take a pause, rewind back, and write those, the acronym and then what they represent. Because for me, I think there's certain acronyms that hold immense value in life. And one of the stories, if I can share, was my late father once told me, whoever you meet in this world, and it relates to your aspect of respect, it doesn't matter their station in life, what they do, where they come from, but for sure, there's one thing in their life that they can do better than you. At least one thing. So if you treat that person with the respect for that, you will be able to have a very proactive, constructive interaction, and you will have the mutual respect for one another. And talking about the respect of students and where we see education, where do you personally see wine education in 5 to 10 years' time, Keith?
I believe that as in all education, there's an evolvement. It's evolving and things are happening. I believe that there's going to be much more demand for online education. The things that you guys do at APWASI in terms of packaging the courses in ways that make sense for both enthusiasts such as myself and people in the trade that are working in the trade, packaging the courses that provide real skills. I think that we're seeing across the board that not all professions need a college degree.
Yes.
And we're beginning to see more and more companies like Google putting their own certifications into the marketplace, right? For like technical things. Google has these workforce certificates that they're offering. So I think we're going to see more and more professions turning to organizations, companies, organizations to create credentialing that is important for jobs that need credentialing, that needs knowledge, but might not need a full-fledged college degree. And I have to say that one of the motivations that I had for doing all of this online training was in wine was to see, can it actually work, right? Can a person get certifications? Can they get credentialing that absent a university setting, right? Does it make sense? Does it work? And I believe that my foray into the training that I've done with your organization and some training that I've done with other organizations, it's a absolute yes, right? There's quality there, and it will meet certain students' needs. So as you say, what's evolving over the next 5 or 10 years? I believe this idea of credentialing is going to really take hold. with this certification, and organizations like yours are at the forefront of this. And I think it's a really important, an important mission.
Yeah, and as a result of that, we often listen to what our students are desiring, what the marketplace is driving, and APWASI has always held as part of the pillars that it has to be practical, it has to be real, and it has to be functional in all senses, and be able to give true value as opposed to regurgitation of just mere statistics, varietals, terroir, which are important, but you don't have that much time when you are with a client or a guest, when you are dealing with them, and you have a very short period in order to put across your message. So definitely, we are on the same platform there, Keith. Now, alluding to APWASI, you are a renowned, well, and highly respected professor of journalism and mass communication. And in the upcoming spring semester, I know you'll be teaching a new course on food journalism.
Yes.
So how has your wine training with APWASI, because you've referred to it quite a few times, Keith, and I appreciate that. How has your wine training with APWASI, do you think, has shaped how you will be teaching this class?
Well, I have some background in kind of an aspect of food journalism. In my early career, I covered the Coca-Cola company as one of my beats. I was a business journalist, but I was covering Coca-Cola, and I've done some freelance writing over the years in the area, different beverage magazines and publications, and so I had this opportunity to teach this class, and I wanted it to be a fun course, right? I think that that doesn't mean that we're going to shy away from some important food journalism topics, such as agricultural sustainability, food waste, food deserts, if you will, and those kind of things. So there's some really meaty subjects that you can tackle as a food journalist, but we want to have some fun with it as well. And I'm just going to put another plug in there. I want my course to be fun the same way that I've had fun taking the APWASI courses, right? I want the students to come into the classroom when we're talking about food journalism and understand that, yeah, there's going to be some of these tough subjects that we'll touch on, but there's also going to be the fun things that we enjoy about life. What do we eat? What do we drink? What gives us pleasure in our meals? And bringing some of the things that I've learned in terms of, flavor science and aromas and how all of that touches, the idea of pairing a beverage to food. And I think all of those kind of things, lend to what I hope to accomplish in that class. The first assignment the students will have to do will be to write a personal essay about the best meal they have ever eaten. And I want them to really dig deep and engage with their memory banks as to why did they choose that meal to write about? What was special about it? And we're going to bring in some chefs to talk to the students, and we're going to bring in some food scientists. Our South Campus has one of the world's preeminent food science programs, and we'll bring in some of those people. And we have a local, it's interesting that here in my college town, we have a wine company that's based in Athens, Georgia, but they actually produce their wines in Oregon and California and Washington State. It's called Kate Arnold Wines.
Okay.
And Gene Arnold, who is the winemaker behind that, he spends a lot of time on the West Coast, but he's agreed to come in and talk to the students about winemaking. And so we're going to tap into some of our local resources there. I'm also going to bring in a sustainable farmer, an agricultural representative, if you will. So I want to touch all of the aspects. We'll see how much we can cram into a 16-week semester, but
well, you're making me salivate with this abundance and cornucopia of knowledge feast that I think your students are really going to marvel at. So congratulations on that. And, I know in many ways when I've taken certain courses, there's some that I prefer and some that I don't. And I know that you've been a veteran of many wine courses. You are, I think, perhaps one of the most prolific wine students that I've met, Keith. So, and I really, truly would like to know, because you've been able to compare all the different available courses out there, but what was it that was the appeal of our APWASI courses over others?
Well, I think that initially it was this idea of a value proposition, right? What am I going to be getting? What am I going to get from this course versus what am I going to have to pay to take this course?
Fair enough.
So I think there was a really an appealing value proposition, and that's what drew me there in the beginning. Then once I was there, I believe then the idea of your approach of taking, the technical knowledge, as you mentioned before, the grapes, the climate, those kind of things, but integrating that thoroughly with the culture of place and the history of place, and making sure that the students come away with this understanding of wine being a collection of many facets, right? A reflection of many facets. And to me, that was an important part of it. And then I have to say, you're not a pretentious wine snob. And I believe that many people are turned off, frankly, by the idea that wine education is pretentious and that wine education can be snobbery. And
Yes.
I believe that your courses are approachable, and the experience that I've had is approachable. You've taken in this Southern boy who's a journalism professor and welcome me into the fold as if I were a member of a prestigious member of the trade. And I appreciated that approach. And frankly, you don't get that across the board.
Understood. And the feeling of respect is very mutual there, Keith. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we spoke about the media. We spoke about, how important it is for institutions and individuals to get their message out there. They have to use weapons that are able to captivate and collect people's minds and bring their hearts out. Now, I know that you have a podcast called Wines We Drink podcast. What inspired that? And what was one of your most memorable moments?
Oh, well, that's a really good two-pronged question there, Clinton. I appreciate you asking. As a professor, sometimes you can teach out of the textbook and things. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I bring a lot of industry experience to bear. But if you're in a classroom and you're talking about a podcast, and it's one thing, I listen to lots and lots of podcasts, but and I actually run a student podcast at our university. So running a student podcast where the students are doing all the work and I'm like the producer or the overseer of what we're doing there is different than doing your own thing. So my initial motivation for doing this and working with one of my former students to put this together was to have some more practical experience about how podcasts work. What are the platforms? How do you actually produce this thing? What's the requirements of getting the show notes together? How much preparation do you have to do? You put it out on a platform. Well, how do you get it to Apple Podcasts? How do you get it to Spotify? How do you promote this thing? It's been very eye-opening to me to understand the importance of social media and promoting the podcast. Because right. It's like the old Field of Dreams. If you build it,
they will come.
But that's not true with podcasts. You will build it, and no one will come if they don't know it exists, right? So in order to have any audience at all, you have to tell people that it's there. So we have a little Instagram account with the podcast, and we have a Twitter account with the podcast.
So listeners, let me interrupt you here. Make sure you listen to Wines We Drink podcast. from Professor Keith Herndon. Carry on, Keith. That's a plug in there.
That's it. That's it. So, so that part of it was really important to me, to understand that. The other part of it was, as I had gone through a lot of this wine training and I wanted to do a podcast, and I was like, well, let's combine the two. Let's see if I can take some of my wine training and turn that into some teaching knowledge. And of course, I was inspired by the fact that I was going to go through your certified wine educator training, and that this podcast would potentially be an activity for that training. So, so all of this has been kind of working in concert, and really good. It's been a really wonderful experience. Now, my most memorable moment of
Yes.
the podcast was an episode that we actually did on location, where we went to one of our local restaurants, Heirloom Cafe, and interviewed Chef Jessica Rothacker and drank a wine with her. She chose a wonderful Aussie rosé from Cape Mentel, and it was a really great experience just being there in the restaurant and having the interview with her and understanding her perspective on a chef and building a wine list and understanding how her wines influence the food, and how her food that she creates influences the wines that she will actually include on the list. And so to me, that was a very wonderful episode, a wonderful experience. And if we end up doing another season of this, we'll do more and more guests. Now, my second most memorable episode was interviewing you for the last episode. So I have to throw that in there, right?
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying, Keith, you have accolade amongst accolade, achievement upon achievement, and you are an APWASI wine spirits professional, and that in itself takes an enormous amount of studying. You've covered all the spirit elements in order to become a wine spirit professional. The tequila, the cognac, the brandy, the whiskey, and you've excelled. And not only that, it's with a great pride that you are now, an APWASI certified wine educator, which I'm sure your students will benefit immensely. Now, while those are accolades that you richly deserve, I especially want to congratulate you on becoming the executive director of the Cox Institute for Journalism, Innovation, Management, and Leadership at your university, Keith. And I think with that, it opens up a new horizon, a new door, and it's going to give you that opportunity to shape minds, capture hearts. So as a final question, what kind of new changes will you be bringing for your future students?
Well, I've been the director for about 5 years, and this new title reflects what we're calling an expanded mission of our institute. And we are, I'm very fortunate to be bringing on board two colleagues. They're already part of our faculty. Dr. Amanda Bright will be joining us as our director of the Journalism Innovation Lab that we run. And Professor Lori Johnston will be joining us as our Director of Content Initiatives. And so working with my two esteemed colleagues, we're going to be doing some things around taking our digital natives and using them in newsrooms, particularly small newsrooms that don't have those resources, and helping small TV stations and small radios come up to speed on some of the digital work that they need to do. On the content side, we're expanding an initiative we have around covering poverty. And that's going to be an important initiative as well. The food journalism thing that I mentioned will be an outgrowth of some of that. And then we're hoping that while that class will be a fun class, that we're also going to be looking at some really tough issues around food deserts and programs to alleviate hunger, and what are happening in local food banks and those kind of things. And so we're really hoping that the stories that we tell and the training that we give our students will make a real impact in our community, in our state, and we'll be preparing these students to tell stories in their professional career.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Keith, having this opportunity to interview you and for you to share what your vision and mission for, you know, the institute under your executive directorship leadership. And I'm sure that what you as the listeners and audience have learned, we don't forget what LEARN, the acronym, what it stands for. And I hope you've enjoyed having this, listening to us today, and the length and breadth and the experience that Professor Herndon brings to us all. And I know it's not going to be the end, it's just only the beginning of what we definitely will look forward to seeing what you are going to produce and your students. Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you, Clinton. I want to just say one more time that I'm proud to be part of the APWASI family. I'm proud to have all of the credentials that we've worked together for me to be able to put behind my name. You know, I've done the reading and taken the exams, but it's your course material that's been inspiring, and I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And equally, we have taken note, and we are constantly making changes because we believe education is always evolving. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening in to the APWASI Wine Buzz. If you would like to know, see more, hear about us, then please don't forget to click and to share and to subscribe. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at our next interview. Bye-bye now.